your ability to influence other people shouldn't be limited to just the people that are around you. It's what can you do through your own behavior.
We are with Professor Harry Kramer. So he's my favorite professor at Kellogg School of Management, and he teaches value-based leadership. And he also wrote 3 books right now, and the 4th book is coming soon.
Yes, on November 5th, yeah.
Yeah, so he's going to give us some sneak peek about his 4th book as well.
Yes.
So the first book was From Values to Action, and the second one is Becoming the Best,
Yes.
and the third one is Your 168.
Right.
So all about living value-based life kind of thing. So we are going to ask some questions that I believe young people face a lot. Like that would be the first questions. So everyone seems to be so successful by the age of 25, but we are already in our 30s. So what should we do about that? I mean, like, we feel that we are not going to be successful anymore because we have already passed the golden age. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's always great to be with you, and you always ask great questions. And I have to admit, you were one of my best students. So I have to admit that. This whole idea that, oh my goodness, if you're not successful and you don't have an IPO when you're 25, 26, oh my goodness, you're in your 30s. Well, I try to look at it in a different way, which is most of us are going to be working until we're at least 50 or 60 years old.
Yes.
And with life getting extended now, and the ability for many of us to have the opportunity to live till 80 or 90, when somebody's in their 30s, you're going to be working for another at least 40, 50 years.
Okay.
So the whole idea of, oh my goodness, this needs to happen very, very quickly, if it turns out that somebody is fortunate, if it turns out that somebody is capable of, in their mid-20s, doing an IPO, I don't think that has anything to do with that somebody may be able to do an IPO or be very, very successful in their 30s or 40s or 50s. I think I've seen situations where somebody's been working for 20 or 30 years for a company like Baxter, and then they come up with some interesting intellectual property, and they do something very, very big when they're 60 years old. So I think this whole idea that I have to worry about what my age is something that I don't think we really ought to be worried about.
How can I catch up with friends who are already becoming CMO, CFO of the company by the age of 30?
Yeah. Well, remember, as you know me so well from class, and you and I always taking the time to interact, I get a little confused when we talk about catching up, because that, in my opinion, sort of connotes the fact that there's a race somewhere, okay? And a race, and I want to win. Well, what are we trying to win, okay? My opinion is, I want to win a title, or I want to win that I have more money than other people. Well, as I talk a lot about, and you made reference to it in my 3rd book, Your 168, I kind of think of it as, when we talk about our life, what really is important. And I happen to believe, when I talk about those 6 principles, which you're aware of, rather than, work-life balance, and I just have to work in order to achieve. Well, take a step back. How do you balance your career, your family, maybe your spirituality, which may be different religions for different people, your health, getting a little bit of sleep, a little bit of exercise, having a little bit of fun, and realizing, we're on this earth for a very short period of time. How can you make a difference while you're on the earth? So this whole idea that there's a race and I've got to win, I think it's really worthwhile asking people, what are you trying to win? What's the race? And my opinion is that, how much money you have and what your title is, in my opinion, ought to be a very, very small part of your life. Now, when you're in your 20s or your early 30s, I just want more. But maybe you've seen the studies. There's been a lot of work shown that the correlation between how happy you are and how much money you have is not very correlated at all. And what I mean by that is, I've seen the graphs where they'll say, up until you're making maybe 70 or 80,000 US dollars, hey, if I make a little bit more, I'm happier. But after $80,000, $90,000 US dollars, there's no correlation at all. In fact, the more money you make, then all of a sudden you end up with people that have drug problems or infidelity problems or, health kind of problems, and they're buying a bunch of stuff and they're worried about it. And all this whole idea of, well, I want to win, I want to have more possessions. I think it really is a question of, what do you value in your life? What really matters to you, right? You may be familiar, and I can't remember whether we use it in our class. There's a great article that people should take a look at from Dr. Clayton Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard, and the article, and is also a book, How Will You Measure Your Life? How will you measure your life? It's really worthwhile taking a look at, Em, because he found that a lot of the folks that graduated from Harvard, when they came back for their 20th reunion, the most successful people had gained 50 or 60 pounds, they had heart problems, they were divorced, they didn't know their children, they had so this whole idea of, well, how do you measure your life? Is it money? Is it a race? Or is it, what can I do to have a better relationship, know my children, have certain religious perspectives, be healthier? So I think you have to really take a step back and figure out. That's why you and I keep talking about self-reflection.
Right.
What are you trying to measure? How are you, as Clayton Christensen would say, how are you trying to measure your life and what matters?
Right. So you mentioned about self-reflection, and you've been self-reflecting your life for the past 40 years, is it?
Yeah. Since I was at Kellogg 40 years ago. Yeah.
And it was daily, 15 minutes every day.
Yes.
I think it's normal for people to discover something about themselves in the first 10 weeks that they do weekly self-reflection that I did during the class, and I discover my own personal values that really shaped me who I am. But after a while, people lost their interest in doing self-reflection. And what did you discover about yourself recently after doing 15 minutes self-reflection daily?
Yeah, so you always ask great questions. You're very, very thoughtful. So let's just take a step back a minute. What do we mean when we say self-reflection? For me, it means, how do I become self-aware? How do I know myself better? How do I figure out what matters and what doesn't matter? And the whole idea in my mind is, when I think about self-reflection, we're all very busy. We're all very, very busy. We've got a lot to do. But taking a little bit of time to step back, as you well know, turn off all the noise, and ask yourself some, I think, pretty good questions, right? What are my values? What is my purpose? What really matters? And as you know, I do that once a year for 3 days of a silent retreat. And then my 15 minutes each day is just to sort of check up on myself. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And so in my mind, it's just doing a little bit of a quick check-in of, hey, did I treat people okay today? Or, you know what, today I was in a meeting and I yelled at a guy. You know what, I didn't need to do that. That was a little rude. Tomorrow I'll just apologize. I'll give him a call. So it's really just the opportunity to figure out, how did the day go? Because none of us are perfect, right?
Of course.
We all know it's a journey. We try to get better. Some days are better than other days. And maybe I don't know if I mentioned this in your class, but I think about this now a lot. Sort of 4 favorite words: discipline, focus, consistency, credibility.
Okay.
And I think if I can stay focused, if I can do it consistently, I really do believe I start to establish a little credibility. And why, when we talk about this, it becomes so important to being a value-based leader are those 3 questions or 3 things I ask myself, right? If I'm not self-reflective, is it possible for me to know myself? I don't think so. If I don't know myself, is it possible for me to lead myself? And then the third part is, if I can't lead myself, how can I possibly lead other people? So everything related to leadership, people like to talk about, how extroverted you are, how charismatic you are. Well, wait a minute. If I can't lead myself, how can I possibly lead other people?
Okay. So it's like self-check-in, whether you have done well or not. And it's not just done well in terms of work, that I think normally people check in only about their work.
That's a good point.
But like you need some other aspects of your life as well, right? Because you have mentioned 6 things, right?
Yeah.
And what are they again? So career and education,
Yes.
and then family,
Correct.
spiritual.
Very good.
What are other things? Fun,
Fun.
health.
Health. Very good.
What is the last one?
You got 5 already, so you get an A. The last one
Thank you.
is social responsibility, being a best citizen.
Okay.
Making a difference in the world. You know, maybe it's doing something for Habitat for Humanity. Maybe it's working in a soup kitchen, whatever. Helping donations for something. So, yes, it's thinking about those things. And you raise a very good point. Again, work is one part of your life. So I may say, hey, did I really exercise enough? You know, was I good enough to my wife, Julie, who I know you're getting to know way too well, okay? You know, am I being a good father, okay? You know, am I really being present? Or, you know, yes, I may be with the children, but if I'm on my phone all the time, am I really there? So it's really, that's why when people often talk about this concept of work-life balance, I always say, wait a minute, you're either working or you're living. No, it's life balance. What are the things you're trying to balance in your life? Which, by the way, it's great you brought that up, because many, many people, and maybe you've seen this with your friends, many people will say to me, Harry, I'm having trouble balancing my life. Well, my observation, most people that are having trouble balancing their life haven't been self-reflective enough to figure out what they're trying to balance. Right. If you haven't figured out what you're trying to balance, how could you possibly balance it? That's why in those 4 principles, self-reflection always comes first.
The most challenging part of your check-in with yourself would be family?
I would say that's an important one, because I have 5 children,
right,
and now 1 grandchild. So, you know, that's a lot there. But I would say thinking about, have I fulfilled what I should relate to my spirituality? You know, am I taking the time, as busy as I am, to make sure that I say my prayers and I think about what my purpose is? I think it's very easy, as you well know, if you have a lot of work, it's a little bit of, you know, I don't have time to exercise. Of course, you know, when somebody says to me, I don't have the time, I always remind people, you have 168 hours.
Okay.
You have the time.
Yeah.
The
so
question
you set
is,
the priority.
is it a priority? Very, very good. Another A, yeah. What is your priority? And are you focused on your priorities? But I think all 6 of those become important. And some would say, well, maybe if I got a lot to do, you know, maybe the fun part. Well, wait a minute. If you're living a balanced life and you're not having any fun, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, I'm sure you've heard that expression, you know, do you work to live, or do you live to work?
Yeah.
It's a good, pretty question. If you're not having any fun, then you got to be asking yourself some pretty serious questions as well.
So better check in with yourself frequently, because even though you have already figured out your personal core values, checking in keep you on track. Right?
Exactly.
You can stay focused.
Right.
What are the words? Discipline, focus,
consistency,
and credibility.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very well. Good job.
Another A.
Yeah, another A. That's 3 A's. We've only been doing this for 10 minutes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
People working in corporate life, they feel like they are victims of the system that they cannot change. What else can they do to change their working life to be better if they are just like one of the entry-level employees?
Sure. Okay. You always ask great questions. So let's think about this a minute. And I'll just role play here a minute. You know, you and I, we're 21. We just got out of school, and we joined a company. All right. Well, it's very easy to say, oh, wait a minute. We're at this entry level. All these people are up here. There's 20, 30,000 people, and you know what? You know, those people up there, they control everything, and I don't know whether I should stay or not. Well, wait a minute. What's the problem? Well, some things really ought to change here. Some things aren't working well. Well, who's going to deal with that? And we always tease that there's this famous group of people called
those guys.
Those guys, okay? Well, no, we are those guys. I mean, we are the men or women. So if we don't like things, what is our ability as leaders to try to impact it? And I think sometimes there's this view of, well, maybe I can leave the people who work for me, but no, those people don't work for me. Those people, I work for them. They're up here.
Right.
And I always remind people, you may remember this from class, that leadership has nothing to do with titles and organizational charts, right?
So you don't need subordinates to be a leader.
Exactly. At the end of the day, leadership has everything to do with being able to influence people. And the way you influence people is you have to be able to relate to people. You remember the model. The whole model is 3 words: leadership, influence, relate. If I can figure out the boss, or it could be the boss's boss, it could be the CEO, okay? They may be up here. But if I can relate to people, if I can demonstrate I have no personal agenda here other than to be helpful, and I can therefore influence folks, well then maybe I can lead them. Maybe I can convince them we ought to do it differently. So that's one piece. There's 2 pieces here. So one is, I'm not a victim. I will try to see what I can do to impact the people above me. Now, the other piece is, well, wait a minute. Even if the organization doesn't change, can we change? Can you and I say, well, wait a minute, maybe they're not providing feedback, maybe they're not giving good direction, but could we do that? Could we get 5 or 6 other 21-year-olds and say, you give me feedback, I'll give you feedback. Let's figure out how we can do this. Why don't we be the people that set an example of how things could be a lot better? And if things could be a lot better and we demonstrate that's better, I think sometimes some of these people may say, hey, what's Em and Harry doing? You know what? Maybe we should do what they're doing. You know, your ability to influence other people shouldn't be limited to just the people that are around you. It's what can you do through your own behavior?
Okay, so it is very hard here for the junior guys to think that they can be one of those guys.
Yeah.
And it is very hard to influence other people, like managing up.
Yeah.
And there are some toxic people as well,
Yeah.
like the colleagues who like to take credits of other people.
Yeah.
What would you suggest if, like, not just the system, but the colleagues are pretty toxic? Like, how do we handle difficult people?
Yeah, super good question. Okay, so very good question. So again, let's role play this thing. Let's assume that you and I are in the company, and I want to be a good person. I want to live the values, but you're there and you're just kind of toxic. I mean, somebody has to be the bad guy.
Yeah. Okay, I'm the villain.
Okay, you're a nice person, but we're going to pretend. Okay, all right. Well, the way I look at it is a couple of ways. The first thing is, I've always view things as, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. You know, maybe you seem toxic, maybe you're taking the credit, but you know what? Maybe you don't realize you're doing it. Maybe you grew up in a family where people weren't very nice to one another. Maybe you didn't have a good father or mother or whatever. So I, because you know, I try to be a very optimistic person, I'll try to give you the benefit of the doubt. So I will try to say, oh, you know, hey, Em, we both worked on this project, but it looked like you were taking the credit, you know, whatever. And you may say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. Hey, Harry, I'll start to do that. That'd be nice, that'd be great. But let's just say you really are just a bad person and you're not going to give the credit. All right, well then I have to ask myself, can I go to work in another area? Can I maybe, depending on the situation, maybe you're kind of toxic, but your boss is actually a pretty good person. Mm-hmm. And can I find a way to talk to that person and say, hey, you know, you need to talk to Em because I think she has some issues. But if it turns out that I give you the benefit of the doubt and you're not a good person, or I can't find the boss who would, well then I may have to leave.
Okay.
Because I actually think if I try to deal with it and I can't find another way, if it stops me, and if I can't find another job in the organization outside, away from you, well, since life is too short, I think that becomes a toxic environment, and in that case, I would probably leave. But not before I see if I give you the benefit of the doubt, I see if I can change your behavior, and I see if I can come up with somebody at a higher level who could change your behavior. But if none of those can happen, then I probably want to leave.
Be optimistic.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yes, we want to try to be optimistic.
Try
Yes,
to
we
be
do.
optimistic and everything is awesome.
Yeah.
So like,
The glass is not half full or half empty. The glass is overflowing. Okay. Life is a matter of attitude here, for sure.
okay, so try to be optimistic, give the benefit of the doubt, let that person know. I wouldn't say that they take credit. I mean, there must be something that you can say that is softer, or they are going to be defensive. If
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and again, you raise a very good point. We're doing this quickly, but I would take a longer version and say, hey, Em, we worked on this project together. When you talk to our boss, would it be okay? Could you mention my name? Could you do that? Remember, the fourth principle is all about genuine humility. So I'll do it in a way where I don't want you to be offended. I want to give you that. I want to give you the opportunity to say, oh, yeah, I didn't mention Harry. I didn't. I want to find out whether it could have been an oversight. It may have something you didn't even realize that you had done. That's where when I talk about let's give the person the benefit of the doubt, because until we realize you're cutthroat and you just care about yourself, well, then it's a whole nother situation.
Okay, so let's revisit 4 principles because other people are not taking the class.
Well, they should. If they're not taking the class, they should read the first book, From Values to Action, the 4 principles of value-based leadership.
Sure.
But let's just go through them, okay?
Yeah,
And they're in a very particular order, as you know. The first one is self-reflection,
of course.
as we've talked about, becoming self-aware, and really, truly knowing your values, your purpose, and what matters. The second one is all about, as you well know, having a balanced perspective. That is, taking the time to understand
All
multiple perspectives.
perspectives.
Very good. Not just the other side. Another A coming up here. Yeah, yeah. Or I like to quote supposedly something that St. Francis said, I seek to understand before I'm understood. And I try to say that almost every day. And that's important, because if you and I are having a discussion and we have a difference of opinion, I will try not to say, I don't understand where you're coming from, because I actually think that's ignorant. If I
Right.
take the time I can understand, then I'll decide, do I agree or disagree, right? And again, the more I teach and the more I think about it, I realize, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, if you and I are having a discussion sometimes and you say, well, I don't understand where you're coming from. Most people, when they say that, they don't want to understand. They're letting you know they disagree. So I was in a board meeting the other day, and a guy, I'll call him Tony, said, well, Harry, I don't understand where you're coming from. I said, Tony, would you like to understand? Because if you'd like to understand, I'm happy to explain it to you. And then, by the way, Tony, you can decide whether you agree or disagree. But don't be ignorant. And again,
Sorry, what was the reaction?
What's that?
What was the answer?
Well, he kind of hesitated I'd like to understand, but it was not what he was going to say. But everybody else was in the room, so
It was working.
it was working. It was definitely working. And I try to do that all the time. And you talk about the younger generation, and I think here's a lesson that we ought to be thinking about. And for sure, as I'm a little older, I'm becoming aware of the danger. There's some positive benefits, but of the danger of relying too much on social media,
Right.
Because the reality of life is, it used to be that you have a view and I have a view, and it could be on immigration issues or gun control. You have an issue, and I have a different perspective. I still like you, I still care about you, but we have a difference of opinion, and that's fine. Well, because of social media, and as you well know, people can be wherever they want to be, but if you're already on the right extreme, or you're on the left extreme, because of social media and this term of echo chambers,
Right.
where, as you know better than I, if you're on the right, everything you hear is exactly consistent with what you want to hear.
So it's confirmation bias.
Very good, confirmation bias. And if I'm on the left, everything I hear is exactly what I want to hear. So now when we have a discussion, instead of, we have a different view, it's like, how could you possibly believe that? I have 100% of the information. And instead of the old days, we have a different view, but I still like you. Now it's, I dislike you, I hate you, I have to stop you. That's a pretty bad place to be, right? One of the things that my grandfather, as you know, I quote my grandfather a lot, who lived with us when I was growing up a lot, and he used to tease me when we would have a walk, and he'd say, Harry, life is much simpler when you only understand your side of the story.
Right.
There's multiple sides of the story.
Yeah.
Okay. And I always learn a lot. There's 3 reasons why. If you and I are having a discussion, and we have a different opinion, you want to go north and I want to go south. There's 3 reasons why I want to know why you think it's north. Number 1, I like you, I respect you, I want to hear your view. Number 2, you think it's north, I think it's south. I'm listening. I want to know why you think it's north. I take my pad out. I take my pen out. I'm taking notes. And in number 2, I may say, okay, hey, stop, Em. Forget about south. I think you're right. Let's go north. Why? Because as a leader, if you remember, I have no need to be right.
Right.
I'm focused on doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And the third one is, I'm taking notes, and I stop and I say to myself, there's no way it's north. It's definitely south. Well, because I took notes, you're not going to say to Julie, oh, Harry doesn't understand. Harry understands. I've got 3 pages of notes, okay? Harry disagrees. And because I took the time to listen to you, I think you may take the time to listen to me, okay? So this whole idea of balanced perspective. The third one is true self-confidence. And people will often say, well, what's the true? You're either self-confident or you're not, right? And I always remind people, we've all worked for people who can act self-confident, that have no self-confidence at all.
Fake it until you make it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no. And I say there's 2 questions you can ask yourself. All of your listeners, there's 2 things that they can ask themselves to help them decide, do they have true self-confidence or not? Do you remember those?
Some people are smarter, some people are prettier. It's okay because I'm a work in progress. So I get better every day.
That's very good. That's very good. Now, the 2 questions.
So that's
wrong.
Okay.
No, that was true. That was all very true. But the 2 questions are, question number 1, serious questions. Have you reached a point in your life where you're comfortable to say, I don't know? Em, I don't know, but I'm looking at my watch. You tell me how fast you need an answer. I'll get you an answer. I just don't happen to know. Are you willing to admit you don't know? Second question. Have you reached a point in your life where you're comfortable to say, I was wrong? Forget what I said. What Julie said makes more sense. Let's do that. Are you willing to admit that you were wrong? Are you willing to admit that you don't know? Now, it's very interesting. Let's be honest, and some of the younger folks may be thinking this. Well, wait a minute. If I say I don't know, or I say that I was wrong, boy, I want my boss, Mary, I want her to think highly of me. What's she going to think if I say I don't know or that I was wrong? Well, let's go back to the formula again. Leadership, influence, relate. Leadership, influence, relate. Think about this a minute. Most people don't relate well to people who know everything.
Okay.
They don't seem human.
Yeah.
Most people don't relate well to people that never make a mistake or never wrong, okay? And so if you're my boss and I say, hey, I don't know, but you tell me how fast you need an answer, okay? I think you may say to yourself, boy, I can relate to Harry because I don't know everything either, okay? And he's going to get an answer for me, so that's okay. Now, to have a little fun with your audience, let's go back to balance for a moment. If you're my boss, if every time you ask me a question, I say I don't know, every time, I have a larger problem. I will probably be unemployed. Right? So you do need to know your job. You do know your job. And by the way, one other little hint that may be good for your audience is, you may remember this. I had a boss one time, and this is true for all your audience as well. He said, any job you're in the rest of your life, it doesn't matter your profession, doesn't matter your location. He said, any job you're in the rest of your life, there's only 2 things you ever have to know in any job.
Okay, let me try.
Ah.
So the first one is what you know and what you don't know. And then the second one is who knows what you don't know.
Another A. Another A. This is amazing. Yeah. And when my boss told me that, I said, you know what? I'm going to do really well because I have about 50 people who know what I don't know, and I let them know that. Now, the fun part of this one is, once in a while, a senior leader will say, this happened a couple weeks ago, he said, I've read all 3 of your books, and self-reflection, yes, very important. Balance, very, very important. But you know, true self-confidence, I don't think so. I said, really, why? He said, I have 800 people working for me. There's no way I want them to know what I don't know. I hold my cards close. I am not going to divulge what I don't know. What do you think about that, Harry? I said, well, they already know what you don't know. They're wondering whether you know what you don't know, or is this whole ship going down, okay? True self-confidence. I never say self-confidence without true, which gets us to the fourth and final one.
Humility.
Genuine humility. Yeah. Genuine humility, right? Yeah.
Almost. B.
That's half credit. B. You get a B for
what?
that. Yeah. It's going to be tough graders. Got to be tough graders. So now the question becomes, how do you know if you have genuine humility? Well, I had to come up with another question for your group. How did you get to where you are so far in your career? You've done a lot of great things. You've been a Kellogg graduate. You've been in companies. You've got 4 things you're doing now. You got a lot going on. How did you get to where you are in your career? I've asked this of junior people, some of these people in their 20s with their IPOs, 30s, some of those older people in their 30s. Okay, I'm teasing because I'm one of those even older people, 60s. And the top 2 responses I usually hear are, Harry, how did I get to where I am? I worked very hard and I have several skill sets. And the combination of working hard and skill sets, that's how I got to where I am. Now, if you ask me quickly, how did you get to where you are? And I don't think about it, I'd say, well, I work very hard. I have several skill sets. But if we're self-reflective, really self-reflective, maybe there's other things we'll think about. And so I'll give you 5 that I think about, okay? You may remember some of these.
Luck.
Very good. Luck, okay? Now, sometimes you say, oh, well, you know, can I plan for luck, prepare? Maybe, but I was lucky. Number 2?
Team.
That's number 3, but we'll go with that. Team, that's good, that's very good, that's good. And the team one is, at the end of the day, and this is an important one, to always realize that as we're a leader, it's not about us. Are we attracting really good people to work for us? And if you develop a great team, and they really want to work for you, you're going to do phenomenally well. You know, people would always say to me, very honestly, oh, well, you know, the fact you were in these jobs when you were very young, you must have been very bright. And I always admit, I wasn't that bright, but I created an environment when I was a manager, a director, a vice president. I try to create an environment everywhere I've been that everybody wanted to work for me. Well, think about it. If you know who the good people are and they want to work for you, you're going to do really, really well.
Right.
Okay? So we got luck, and you said team. How about timing?
Oh, timing.
Being in the right place at the right time.
Right.
Now, some people combine luck and timing. I don't, because what happened to me, I may have mentioned this, there were several times you have to sense of humor here, several times I got promoted. The person who was in the job before me, when they were in the job, they accomplished nothing. You replace those people, you look like you walk on water. Okay?
Yeah.
And then one time I literally said, well, thank you, but I'm just breathing. Big improvement over the last guy who was in the job.
Okay. So right. Like comparing to the last guy.
Exactly. So luck, timing, the team. The 4th one is mentors, sponsors. I mean, if it wasn't for Dean Jacobs at Kellogg, if it wasn't for Mr. Graham, who was the chairman of Baxter, I could think of 8 or 9 other people. If it wasn't for those people, there's no way I would have been in these jobs. You never forget the people who helped you get there. And therefore, maybe you ought to be thinking about, how am I developing the people below me and pay it forward just like people did for me. Luck, timing, the team, mentors. And the 5th one is sort of, in my case, well,
spiritual?
your religious, spiritual. Very good. Religious, spiritual perspectives, right? And at least in my religion, and I think in many, we realize, hey, these are talents we've received that we're supposed to use to the best of our ability. And it's not about us. It's not about us. I've been given these talents, and I'm supposed to use them to the best of my ability. What I realize is if any of those 5 work for you, if you admit luck, timing, the team, mentors, maybe somebody upstairs, then I think you start to realize you remember, you never forget where you came from, because many of us start off with very little or nothing. You keep things in perspective, and by keeping things in perspective, you realize that the higher you go up in an organization, there better be people who knew you before you became a big shot. Because on the way to becoming a big shot, some people are going to start to say, Harry, you're amazing. Harry, if Harry's not careful, Harry could believe it.
Yeah.
Why is that a problem? One last time. If it's leadership, influence, relate, most people do not relate well to egomaniacs. Most people don't relate well to people where it's all about them. And I think the light starts to go on that you realize every single person matters. Okay? And when you start to realize that, the reason I say genuine humility is we've all worked for people that'll say everybody's important, but then when you watch what they do and you realize that's just a lot of talk. Okay? So faking this, you look really stupid. So you better be sincere about it, and that's why I never say self-confidence without true, so I never say humility
without genuine.
Genuine, exactly. And then I think about your journey when some people say, oh, I'm already a leader. Well, you may already be a leader, but as you remember, leadership isn't a destination, it's a journey. Every day I'm given on this earth, I can get better. Now, some days it's 2 steps forward, 3 back. Every day's not a great day, we've been through that. But if you realize it's a journey, and you say to yourself, hey, I ought to try to improve, well, how could I be a better leader? It's the 4 principles. Can I become more self-reflective and self-aware? Can I figure out a way to have a balanced perspective, seek to understand before I'm understood? Can I develop true self-confidence? And can I have genuine humility? And if you can do those things, I would argue if you come into a company, even at a low level, rather than thinking, oh, I'm a victim, or as you said earlier, what can I do to make a change? And if I can't really make a change, I have enough true self-confidence to know I'm good, I'm never perfect, but I'll go someplace else and I'll do well someplace else.
Okay.
We almost did the whole 30-hour class. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question would be related to what you said earlier about most of us started from scratch or like a very low place, right?
Yeah.
But then only a few of us succeed. So a lot of people believe that you need unfair advantage in order to succeed. If you don't have unfair advantage in terms of the surname or like coming from wealthy family,
yeah,
or some kind of connections that people cannot get,
yeah,
you need to do something kind of dirty or like corruptions or bribery in order to get ahead. Do you think it is possible for a company, for a corporate to be so big without doing some dirty things or born with wealthy family?
Yeah, okay, so no, you always ask great questions. And notice, remember, I always say no answers, opinions, right? So I give an opinion. So there's almost a couple different things that are involved in this question. So first of all, I think there are some people that because they come from a wealthy background or they have a certain surname or whatever, that they may have an advantage. I can't deny that. But I think there's a lot of people, you may be one of them, I may be one, Julie may be another. I know a lot of people who started off with very little who've done very, very well. Do some people may have an advantage because they were wealthy or they had a surname? Yes, I think that's true. But I think there's plenty of opportunity for the rest of us if you focus on self-reflection and balance and true self-confidence and genuine humility. And establish a network. A network is important. Trying to meet as many people as you can. Trying to read as much as you can. I know you're a great reader. Trying to get exposed to different people. So I never felt myself, oh, I did not come from a wealthy background, or, oh, I don't have a big name. That never bothered me because I thought I've got many other opportunities that I can. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I view it as there are companies, and a company is almost sort of like kind of a strange comment here, but I think of companies sometimes almost like I think of as people. There are some very good people, and there are some bad people. Okay? I think there's some good companies, and there's some bad companies. I think there are companies, I was very proud at Baxter, that we didn't tolerate somebody doing something bad. And when somebody did, we would let them know right away, you're going to be fired. You're not going to be here. Are there some companies where some of the senior people are not very good and they do bad things, like you remember probably reading about Enron? Okay, so there are definitely situations that occurs. But I would never say, oh, if you're in a big company, you have to do something illegal. No, I don't think so at all. Are there some that do? Yes, but I don't view it any differently than I view some people being good and some people being bad. If you got a good company and you got good people, and you set a clear expectation that if you're not doing good things, you won't be here, you can have a good approach. In fact, one of the things that I've developed since you were a student that is a little 4-step model that may be helpful is, why do bad things happen sometimes? Well, my opinion is, I think very often, Em, and you may have a view on this, that sometimes we just make a lot of assumptions. We don't make it really clear what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So I have a little 4-step process that I've been using a lot lately. Number 1, you set a clear expectation as what is acceptable and what isn't. Number 2, you communicate the expectation over and over and over. And they literally say that the average person needs to hear something at least 3 times before they've heard it. Now, Julie will say until she's told me something 10 times, I haven't heard it, but that's my little personal problem. Number 3, we will hold people accountable. And number 4, there's consequences, both positive and negative. So if I set an expectation and you agree to it, now, is it okay, Em, that this is what needs to happen? Yeah, Harry, yeah, I'll make sure it happens. Now, let's communicate. Are you sure what we just agreed to? Does that make sense? We're going to talk about it. Okay, now I have no problem holding you accountable, and there's consequences. If you do it, you'll get rewarded. You may get a bonus. You may be promoted. And if you don't do it, maybe you won't get a bonus or you won't get promoted, and it'll impact your career. And it's interesting. I get asked by senior people all the time, well, geez, Harry, how do you know? I really love the simplicity of this. How do you know you're setting clear expectations? How do you know? Well, interestingly enough, if I set a clear expectation, I'll never surprise you. I'll never surprise you. So if I don't make it real clear and I call you into my office and I say, hey, Em, I'm really upset about such, and you say, oh my goodness, I didn't know. Well, I don't feel good about that. I don't feel as a value-based person because what did I do? I made an assumption that would be clear. Mm-hmm. Well, you may have grown up in a different country, in a different circumstance, and maybe that was okay, right? Well, set a clear expectation, communicate, hold people accountable, and there's consequences.
Do you believe that doing the right thing is more difficult than doing the wrong thing or taking the shortcut, and it might cost that somebody who does the right thing career, family, or even life? Yeah,
so you know what, maybe this is where you're going to accuse me of probably being too optimistic, but I actually think if, famous 2-letter English word, if you set the clear expectations and you communicate it clearly and you hold people accountable, in my mind, the chance of doing something and being affected by it adversely because you're doing the right thing, I think that's only going to happen if you're in a bad company where people want you to do the bad thing, okay? But if you're in a good company, you're rewarded for doing the good thing. You're not going to lose your job for doing the right thing. Now, if you're in a bad company and they're doing bad things, then if you don't go along with it, you could lose your job. Well, if you're a good person, you shouldn't be in that company anyway. You should have left. You should have left. That's the way I look at it.
What do you think about whistleblower? Like, for example, in Theranos?
Yeah.
Like at that time that there's no one looking into Theranos, and like all the investor believe Elizabeth.
Right.
And there's a whistleblower that was threatened. I feel like they could lose their life if they say something to the news reporter, but they end up saying that eventually, if that's your daughter or son.
Yeah.
Would you recommend them to do the right thing even though it's dangerous?
I guess, I mean, seriously, I just think you should do the right thing. I think you should do the right thing. And I think I know you're trying to catch me here, but if you're doing the right thing, 99% of the time, it'll work out okay. All right? The problem with Theranos was she was a really bad person, and she surrounded herself with other really bad people. Okay? But I don't know what ended up happening, by the way. Maybe you can tell I don't know what happened. At the end of the day, she's in prison. Okay, what happened to that whistleblower? They didn't lose their life or anything, and that was a pretty terrible situation.
I guess that they are still alive.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know of situations where people have lost their life over this.
Okay.
You may lose your job, but if you lose your job, you shouldn't be in that company anyway. Why would you be in a company that's a bad company?
Sure.
That's the way I think about it.
So do the right thing and do the best.
Very good. The best
Another
you can.
A?
What's that? Another A. Another A. Yeah, exactly. So your average is definitely A. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say to people who are struggling in their life? Self-reflection is scary to some people.
Yeah.
Because they do not want to face the fact that they're off balance in some part of their lives.
Yeah.
So those who are currently struggling might not want to take the ownership of their own mistake.
Yes, that's very fair.
So how would they start embracing the fact or start doing self-reflection or getting back on track?
Yeah, no, you ask wonderful questions, and that's the real world. So we ought to really deal with the real world. I guess my view would be, and I always kind of role play these things, right? So if it turns out that I've got problems and I don't want to own up to it or whatever, and self-reflection's kind of scary, can I at least admit to myself, things aren't going well here. Things aren't going well. And I don't feel good about things. I don't feel good about myself. Well, what are some things I could do? Well, if I have any kind of a religious perspective, is it something I could pray about? Is it something I could meditate about? To do it in a way, though, that doesn't scare me as much. Okay. Or could I find somebody? Could I find a best friend? Could it be a sibling? Could it be, somebody that I know that I could just very quietly start to talk about this a little bit? No, not real direct, not in my face, not start self-reflecting or go on a retreat, but hey, I want to run something by you. I'm a little worried about this, because most of us can't do this stuff ourselves in our life. We need people, we need relationships, and I think by establishing a few relationships and letting people know, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this, and just gradually going into it, praying a little bit about it, finding somebody who understands you and is sympathetic. Okay, yeah, well, maybe I could start to read a little bit about self-reflection. Maybe I should start to read Your 168.
Yeah.
Okay, and then gradually develop a little bit of a process, either by myself or with somebody else, right? Because you don't want to be doing this all yourself anyway. I know I often mention how you start with self-reflection, but I think you need to have a couple of people that you can do this with. Julie will often say to me, Harry, left to your own devices, you could convince yourself of anything. Do you want to know what I think? Now the answer to that better be yes, or I'm in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
I'm in a lot of trouble.
Because your wife will always be right.
Yeah, well, two things I should say. One, she's always right. And two, if I begin to think maybe she's wrong, immediately go back to number one.
Okay. A sneak peek of your fourth book. And tell us why the first book is From Values to Action.
So when I first started teaching, it's interesting how this has made a progression, which honestly I hadn't really thought of originally. But I often follow, when you were one of my students, others, following what sort of makes sense. And in the very beginning, as you and I have talked about, it was, okay, how do I become a value-based leader? How do I do that, right? And the 4 principles. And then people started to say, all right, that's how you're a value-based leader. How do you build a value-based organization? Right, that was the second one. And then before COVID, it suddenly became, as you know, well, how do you live a value-based life? which became year 168. And literally, about a year ago, a couple of people said, all right, how you become a value-based leader, how you build a value-based organization, how you live a value-based life. How about a fourth book? How do you live a value-based legacy? What are you doing not just for this world, but for the world beyond when you're here? What difference do you want to make? And we talk about Andrew Yoon and the 1 Acre Fund that people can look up, by the way, oneacrefund.org, making a difference in Africa. I mentioned to you there was a woman who lost her son as a result of a drug overdose and said this shouldn't happen. So she's actually started a nonprofit foundation completely focused on helping pain management so that it doesn't get to that point. And so the whole thesis of the book is, wait a minute, this is not just about me. It's what difference can I make and the people around me, from very, very small ways to, helping a little bit at a clinic or a Habitat for Humanity, to setting up a foundation and making a very, very huge difference. And that's the whole thesis of the fourth book, which is building a value-based legacy that will come out on November the 5th.
I think that's pretty much about it. So if you want to live a value-based life, even if you don't need to lead right now, even if you feel like you're not one of those guys, leading only yourself, you can do these 4 steps. The first one would be self-reflection. The second one is balance, taking all the perspectives, like understand all perspectives before making a decision. And then the third one is true self-confidence.
Very good.
That is when you are able to admit that you are wrong or that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth one would be genuine humility.
Correct.
Everyone is important. Respect everyone.
Exactly. And everyone matters.
And everyone matters. So that's 4 steps to start. But if you want to know how to live value-based legacy, the next one, value-based legacy, will come out on the
November 5th.
Thank you.
A lot
Thank
of fun.
you so much.
It was a lot of fun.
Yay.
Yeah.